You've noticed it, haven't you? How some mornings seem to decide who you will be before you've even taken a full breath. And the heaviest part is that nothing dramatic has happened, yet your energy already feels spoken for. Your eyes open, and before the day begins, a familiar weight has entered the room. It may be worry. It may be pressure. It may be that old, unnamed sadness you have learned to carry so quietly that other people no longer notice it, and sometimes even you forget how much effort it takes to hold it. This is important to hear. You are not failing at life because your mornings feel tender. You are not weak because your first thoughts are not always bright. You are not doing spirituality wrong because peace does not immediately rush in the moment you wake. Somewhere deep inside, you've always known that mornings are sacred, and that is exactly why they reveal so much. They do not create your truth. They uncover it. They show you what has been waiting beneath the surface while the world was asleep and your mind had no more distractions to hide behind. And when you begin to understand that, something softens. Because perhaps the goal was never to force yourself into becoming cheerful before sunrise. Perhaps the invitation is gentler than that. Perhaps you are being asked to listen before you perform, to receive before you react, to remember before you resume the roles your life requires of you. Your heart already knows this. It has been whispering it for a long time in the language of fatigue, in the language of longing, in the language of that strange ache for a slower beginning that you keep dismissing as unrealistic. What if the first few moments of your day are not small at all? What if they are not incidental, accidental, or spiritually neutral? What if those moments are the doorway through which your entire inner climate is set in motion? Not because of magic tricks or empty promises, and not because one perfect routine solves everything, but because what you agree to hear in those first quiet moments becomes the tone your nervous system carries into the rest of the day. You've been carrying so much. Expectations, responsibilities, invisible griefs, conversations that never fully left your body. Disappointments you keep telling yourself you should be over by now. And then morning comes, and without meaning to, you begin your day by meeting all of that at once. No wonder your energy feels fragile. No wonder peace can feel far away. No wonder your spirit sometimes feels like it's waking up already in defense. Let that settle for a moment. Nothing is wrong with you. Something in you is asking for a different beginning. There is a reason loving words can feel so powerful in the morning. There is a reason a tender voice, a gentle affirmation, a moment of conscious listening can move through you differently at dawn than it does at noon. In those first moments after waking, you are more open than you realize. The walls are thinner. The old identity has not fully tightened around you yet. The world has not fully named you yet. You are standing at a threshold, and thresholds are holy places. They do not ask you to become someone else. They ask you to notice who you are before the noise returns. What if I told you that your energy is listening all the time, especially when you are not consciously directing it? What if the exhaustion you feel is not simply from doing too much, but from repeatedly receiving the wrong messages in the most impressionable moments of your day. Messages like hurry, messages like prove yourself, messages like be smaller, be tougher, be more productive, be less sensitive, be less needy, be more impressive, be less you. No one may be saying those exact words aloud, and yet your body can still hear them through habit, memory, and anticipation. That is why morning listening matters. Not because it makes you spiritual enough, not because it turns you into an ideal version of yourself, not because it guarantees a perfect day. It matters because it interrupts the old conversation. It places a loving truth where fear has been speaking automatically. It brings your own soul back into the room before anxiety starts making introductions. And yes, I said your soul, because there is something in you that has never been confused about your worth, even when your mind has been. There is something in you that has never doubted your belonging, even when rejection left its mark. There is something in you that knows how to breathe more deeply, love more freely, and soften more honestly than the patterns you inherited. Morning listening is not about importing wisdom from outside yourself as though you are empty. It is about allowing the right words to awaken what is already alive within you. Maybe that is why certain sentences land in your chest before they make sense in your mind. Maybe that is why a simple phrase like, "I am safe in my own life," can make your eyes fill with tears you did not expect. Maybe that is why hearing "I deserve peace" can feel almost uncomfortable at first, as though some hidden part of you does not know where to place that kind of kindness. Have you noticed that? How tenderness can feel unfamiliar when you have spent years surviving. How receiving can feel more vulnerable than striving. How the body can resist exactly what the soul has been craving. You are not imagining this. Your body remembers every atmosphere it has ever had to adapt to. It remembers criticism. It remembers chaos. It remembers walking on eggshells. It remembers being praised for achievement more than for essence. It remembers being needed more than being nurtured. So when you wake up, your system may still be scanning for what will be required of you today. It may still be bracing. It may still be asking, what do I need to do to be okay here? And this is where everything begins to shift, not with force, but with repetition. The words you hear each morning become a new atmosphere, a new emotional environment, a new message delivered not once, but again and again, until your body stops treating love like a stranger, until your mind stops assuming that pressure is the price of progress, until your energy begins to recognize peace not as a rare event, but as a home frequency. This hasn't been an easy journey for you. So many souls right now are waking up tired, not because they slept badly, but because they have been living too long inside an internal language that never truly held them. And yet here you are, still searching, still open, still willing to try again. That takes immense courage. It takes courage to believe that something as simple as listening every morning could matter when life has taught you to trust only what is hard. It takes courage to return to gentleness when intensity has been your normal for so long. Here's what I've come to understand. Transformation often enters quietly. It does not always announce itself with dramatic revelations. Sometimes it arrives like dawn touching a dark room without argument. Nothing is forced, nothing is grabbed. The light simply keeps returning, and eventually the room no longer belongs to the night. This is how your energy shifts. Not because you conquer yourself, but because you keep meeting yourself with something kinder than the old story. Have you noticed how exhausting it is to begin the day trying to fix yourself? To wake up already measuring what you haven't done, what you haven't become, what still needs healing, what still needs changing. That kind of beginning drains energy before life even begins. It teaches the mind that every day is a test and the self is the problem. No wonder joy feels delayed. No wonder rest feels earned instead of natural. No wonder the spirit begins to whisper, there has to be another way. There is another way. It begins with listening. Not the kind of listening that collects information, not the kind of listening that turns healing into another task on the list. A quieter listening, a receptive listening. The kind that says, before I become who the world expects today, let me spend a moment with what is true. Let me hear words that remind me I am more than my pressure. Let me begin in a field of compassion instead of a courtroom of judgment. Let me remember that I do not have to earn the right to be gentle with myself. And the beautiful thing is this: your energy responds long before your life visibly does. That matters because many people give up too quickly on practices that are working beneath the surface. They look for immediate outer proof. They want the day to suddenly become easier, the relationships to immediately improve, the fear to disappear overnight. And while outer life can absolutely change in response to inner shifts, the first evidence is usually subtler: a softer chest, a slower reaction, a little more space before panic, a little less shame after making a mistake, a little more ability to return to yourself after being triggered. These are not small things. These are signs that your inner climate is changing. You may not realize how much of your suffering has come from starting the day in emotional exile. You wake up and leave yourself behind. You move toward obligation before connection. You let fear speak first. You let the world define the atmosphere before your own soul has had a chance to enter the conversation. Morning listening changes that. It says, I will not abandon myself at the doorway of the day. I will not step into life without first remembering who is stepping. This is not selfish. It is sacred responsibility. Because the energy you bring into your day touches everything. It touches the way you speak to your children, your partner, your co-workers, your own body. It touches the way you eat, decide, respond, and interpret. It touches what you believe about delays, mistakes, silence, and uncertainty. If your morning begins in fear, the day is often filtered through defense. But when your morning begins in softness, even challenges are met by a different self, not a weaker self, a truer one. Somewhere deep inside, you've always known that the first voice matters. Maybe for years that first voice has been old anxiety. Maybe it has been the critic that learned how to sound responsible. Maybe it has been a flood of unfinished thoughts from yesterday. Maybe it has been the emotional inheritance of people who never learned how to greet themselves kindly. You may have called that normal. You may have called that adulthood. You may have called that discipline. But what if it has simply been conditioning? And what if it can change? You do not have to fight every old thought one by one to begin shifting your energy. That is important to hear. Healing does not require you to wrestle every shadow to the ground before you are allowed peace. Sometimes healing begins by changing what gets the first microphone. Sometimes you let loving truth speak before old pain fully wakes up. Sometimes you create such a consistent rhythm of nourishment that the nervous system begins to expect safety instead of threat. That is when mornings stop feeling like something you survive and start feeling like something that serves you. Imagine what it would feel like to wake and hear words that remind you gently and steadily that your life is not your enemy, that your body is not a burden to drag through the day, that your sensitivity is not a flaw to manage, that your emotions are not inconveniences, that your mistakes do not cancel your worth, that the future does not need to be solved before breakfast, that peace is not waiting at the end of perfection. It is available now in the way you greet yourself. Your sensitivity is a gift. Let that land fully. Not because it is always comfortable, not because it has not made life complicated at times, but because your sensitivity is how you know when something is off. It is how you sense what needs gentleness. It is how you recognize beauty, misalignment, truth, and energy. The problem was never your sensitivity. The pain came from living in environments, outer or inner, that treated sensitivity like weakness. Morning listening begins restoring dignity to that part of you. It says, I will not shame the instrument through which life speaks to me most clearly. And perhaps you have needed that more than you knew. Because when people spend years being strong, useful, capable, and composed, they often forget that energy is shaped not only by what they do, but by what they allow themselves to receive. You may be excellent at giving, excellent at enduring, excellent at showing up. But receiving peace each morning may still feel unfamiliar. That is all right. We begin there. Not with mastery, with willingness, not with perfection, with permission. What if your whole day could be altered by what you consent to hear in the first 10 minutes? Not because you are fragile, but because you are powerful. Not because you are easily swayed, but because consciousness is formative. What you repeatedly hear becomes what you more easily believe. What you more easily believe becomes how you more instinctively feel, and how you habitually feel becomes the atmosphere from which you live. This is why repeating loving messages is not shallow. It is structural. It is foundational. It is like tending the soil before asking anything beautiful to grow. You do not shame the soil for being dry. You water it. You do not condemn a room for being dark. You open it to light. You do not punish a frightened body for protecting itself. You teach it over time that safety is here now. This is the quiet miracle of listening every morning. It does not ask you to become someone else. It asks you to sit, even for a little while, in the presence of language that tells the truth about you more lovingly than fear ever has. And over time, that truth begins to feel less like a concept and more like an atmosphere, less like something you hope is real and more like something your body can finally recognize. Maybe that is the shift you have been longing for. Not a dramatic escape from life, but a new way of entering it. Not a perfect mood, but a softer baseline. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of inner companionship. Not instant certainty, but the end of beginning each day in abandonment. And when that shift begins, you feel it. You may still have responsibilities. You may still face difficult conversations. You may still move through grief, transition, or uncertainty. But there is more room around it, more breath, more awareness, more choice. You stop feeling as though every emotion gets to drive. You stop believing every thought deserves authority. You stop confusing urgency with importance. You become less available for the old panic because something steadier has begun living in your mornings. Have you noticed how different life feels when your energy is not already leaking before the day begins? That is why we return again and again to the morning. Not to control the day, but to consecrate it. Not to manipulate reality, but to align with it more lovingly. Not to perform wellness, but to create a meeting place between your mind, your body, your spirit, and the life you are actually living. And here is something most people do not talk about. The morning is not only about your thoughts. It is also about your emotional posture. Are you meeting the day clenched or open? Are you arriving in self-judgment or self-trust? Are you speaking to yourself like a burden or like someone beloved? These questions matter because energy follows relationship. The relationship you have with yourself in the first moments of the day shapes how all the rest will be experienced. If you begin with inner violence, even success can feel harsh. If you begin with tenderness, even difficulty can become workable. That is not fantasy. That is the power of atmosphere. So if you are here because something in you feels tired of hard mornings, tired of waking up braced, tired of carrying invisible heaviness into every sunrise, I want you to know this is not the end of your story. It may not even be the beginning. It may be the moment you finally stop dismissing the quiet medicine you have needed all along. It may be the moment you realize that changing your energy does not begin with changing everything in your life. Sometimes it begins with changing what you allow into your heart before the rest of the world arrives. And as we move deeper into this together, I want you to notice your body. Notice your shoulders. Notice your jaw. Notice the breath moving through your chest. You do not have to make anything happen. You do not have to agree with every word immediately. You do not have to force peace. Simply notice whether something in you recognizes this. Because recognition is often the first sign of truth. Somewhere deep inside, you've always known that the way you begin matters. You've always known that words carry energy. You've always known that repetition becomes identity. And you've always known that a gentler life would have to start with a gentler relationship to yourself. So let us begin there, at the doorway, in the first light, in the sacred minutes when the old day is gone and the new one has not yet fully formed. That is where your energy can shift. That is where your healing can enter. That is why the voice of love can become stronger than the echo of fear. And once that happens enough times, something beautiful begins to unfold. You no longer wake up to survive. You wake up to return. What you call a bad morning is often something far more tender and far more powerful than that. It is not always laziness. It is not always lack of discipline. It is not always an attitude problem. Sometimes it is accumulated emotion arriving before language does. Sometimes it is your body carrying yesterday into today, because it never truly felt permission to put it down. Sometimes it is your nervous system waking up before your spirit has had a chance to say, "Beloved, we are here now, and we do not have to begin in battle." So many people misunderstand themselves in the morning. They judge their heaviness. They criticize their slowness. They rush to override their feelings before they have listened to what those feelings are trying to say. But morning sensitivity is often sacred information. It tells you what is unresolved. It reveals what has been pushed aside. It shows you what kind of relationship you have been having with your own inner world. And rather than punishing yourself for that revelation, you can begin to meet it with curiosity. What is this heaviness trying to tell me? What am I assuming before the day has even begun? Whose voice do I keep waking up inside? What if my first responsibility is not performance, but presence? Questions like these do not slow healing down. They deepen it. They keep you from treating your spirit like a machine that should function on command. Your heart already knows this. Healing is not the art of becoming more efficient at self-abandonment. Healing is the art of becoming honest enough to notice where you have been leaving yourself out of your own life. For many people, mornings have become a place where old conditioning rehearses itself. Before the body fully stretches, the mind has already begun reciting familiar scripts. There is too much to do. You are behind. You are not enough. You should be better by now. Why are you still struggling with this? You need to figure everything out today. Those messages may sound practical on the surface. They may even masquerade as responsibility. But underneath, they create emotional pressure that empties the body of joy before the day has had a chance to offer anything new. And then people wonder why their energy feels low. Beloved, energy is not only physical, it is relational. It is shaped by what kind of inner environment you are living in. If your first moments are spent in judgment, fear, rushing, and internal criticism, your energy is responding to that relationship. It is not betraying you. It is answering the atmosphere. This is why changing your morning words matters so deeply. You are not decorating the surface. You are altering the environment in which your whole being is asked to rise. You may have grown up in a world where mornings were not gentle. Perhaps there was tension in the house. Perhaps there was emotional unpredictability. Perhaps the day began with haste, criticism, silence, or pressure. Perhaps there was never time to notice what you felt because everyone was too busy managing what had to be done. If that was true for you, then your body may have learned that morning means vigilance. Morning means bracing. Morning means mobilizing before softness has a chance to appear. You are not broken for carrying that. And you are not required to keep carrying it forever. What if the energy shift you crave is not about adding more intensity to your life, but about introducing a new emotional experience where the old one used to dominate? What if hearing loving words each morning is a way of telling your whole system, this moment belongs to peace now? This threshold is no longer reserved for panic. This doorway is no longer where self-judgment gets to stand guard. We are creating a new entrance into life. That kind of repetition matters more than most people realize. Because your body learns by experience, your heart opens by consistency, and your beliefs change most powerfully when they are felt, not argued with. You might hear a loving affirmation one morning and think, I don't fully believe that yet. That is all right. Belief often begins as exposure. You do not have to be fully convinced on the first day for the words to begin working in you. A seed does not become a tree the moment it touches the soil. And yet something real has already begun. The contact itself matters. The willingness matters. The repetition matters, especially when the old story has had years to establish itself as familiar. Have you noticed how often people trust what feels familiar more than what feels loving, even when the familiar is painful? That is one of the hidden reasons change can feel so uncomfortable. The nervous system does not automatically prefer what is good for you. It often prefers what is known. So when you begin listening each morning to messages of safety, worthiness, gentleness, and possibility, part of you may not know where to place them at first. That does not mean they are false. It may simply mean they are new, and new can feel tender. You may even notice resistance, boredom, emotional numbness, irritation, tears. A voice inside that says, this is silly, this won't change anything, you don't have time for this, you should be doing something more practical. Listen carefully when that happens, because resistance often rises where change is beginning. Not as proof that you are failing, but as proof that the old atmosphere feels itself being questioned. What if the reason you want to skip the practice is the very reason you need it? What if the part of you that dismisses softness has been overworked for years? What if beneath the skepticism is a deeper ache, the ache of someone who has gone too too long without being spoken to with kindness. This is not about forcing a mood. It is about making a relationship with your own consciousness, a relationship with your own mornings, a relationship with the voice you choose to let lead. And relationships are built through rhythm, through returning, through small acts of devotion that say, I may not be where I want to be yet, but I will not meet myself carelessly anymore. There is such dignity in that. There is such healing in deciding that the first words entering your field each morning will no longer be random, accidental, or inherited from fear. They will be chosen. They will be aligned. They will remind you of what remains true even when life feels uncertain. They will tell your body what your soul has been longing to hear. You are safe enough to soften. You are worthy of your own compassion. You do not have to outrun yourself today. You do not have to begin in shame. And imagine what happens when those messages are no longer occasional, but daily. Daily is where identity begins to move. Daily is where the body stops calling peace a special event and starts calling it a pattern. Daily is where the energy field begins to reorganize itself around a new center. If you've been waking up already feeling burdened, it may be because your mornings have been occupied by emotional residue your spirit has not had space to process. If you've been craving silence, it may be because the inner noise has gone on too long. If you've been feeling more sensitive lately, it may be because the old way of living no longer fits the truth of who you are becoming. These are not punishments. These are invitations. They are signs that your current inner atmosphere cannot carry you where your soul wants to go. This hasn't been an easy journey for you. There may have been seasons when you kept everything moving on the outside while quietly unraveling on the inside. There may have been mornings when you smiled, produced, responded, and performed while some deeper part of you whispered, I cannot keep beginning the day like this. And maybe no one knew. Maybe you yourself barely admitted it. But your energy knew. Your body knew. Your spirit knew. And still, you kept going. That matters. Honor that. Honor the strength it took to function in atmospheres that never fully nourished you. Honor the resilience that carried you through days begun in pressure. Honor the tenderness that survived anyway. Because the fact that you are here, drawn toward a gentler beginning, means something in you has not given up. It means some deep, intelligent part of your being is still reaching toward wholeness, still reaching toward truth, still reaching toward a life that does not have to be earned through exhaustion. Morning listening is one way you answer that reaching, not with urgency, not with perfection, with devotion. Maybe only 5 minutes at first. Maybe while the room is still dim and the world has not yet begun asking anything of you. Maybe while you sit on the edge of the bed, or stand by the window, or place a hand over your heart, and let words of love enter the day before fear does. That moment is not small. It is the reorientation of the self. It is the sacred interruption of an old pattern. It is the decision to let consciousness be shaped by truth instead of habit. And that decision repeated becomes a new life. You may not feel it dramatically at first. Sometimes the shift is quiet. You simply notice that you no longer dread mornings the same way, or that your mind does not spiral as quickly, or that when a challenge arises, you recover sooner, or that you speak to yourself with a little less cruelty when something goes wrong, or that the old panic begins to lose some of its authority. These are not minor improvements. These are signs that your energy is no longer being governed by the same internal agreements. There is power in changing what you agree to hear, because every day, consciously or unconsciously, you are agreeing to messages about your worth, about the world, about your body, about time, about what it means to succeed, fail, rest, want, feel, and belong. Morning listening lets you choose those agreements with greater care. It says, I no longer consent to begin the day under the rule of fear. I no longer consent to treat myself like an emergency the moment I wake. I no longer consent to internal language that turns my own life into a threat. That is an energetic shift, and perhaps more than anything, it is an act of self-respect. What if the peace you want is not missing, only unpracticed? What if the gentler self you long to become is already present, waiting for more supportive conditions? What if your mornings have not been proving that you are incapable of peace, but revealing how much more carefully you deserve to be met? You deserve that care. Not later, not when you have achieved more, not when you are more healed, more certain, more productive, more spiritually impressive. Now, this morning, the next one, and the next, because your life is happening in the atmosphere you create today. And if the atmosphere is one of self-judgment, everything feels harder than it needs to. But if the atmosphere begins to hold more compassion, more patience, more loving truth, then even the same life can begin to feel profoundly different. That is why listening every morning matters. It changes not only what you think, it changes what you carry. Somewhere between waking and rising, you are meeting the emotional atmosphere you have carried for years. Before the messages arrive on your phone, before the lists begin forming in your mind, before the world reminds you of your roles and your unfinished tasks, you are already encountering the field you live inside. Sometimes that field is spacious. Sometimes it is tangled. Sometimes it is full of unspoken grief, old fear, and familiar responsibility. And when you do not consciously choose what enters that space, the past often rushes in to fill it. This is why the first moments matter so much. They reveal which atmosphere has had the strongest claim on you. They reveal what your body expects life to feel like. They reveal what your mind assumes is true before evidence has even arrived. If the day begins in dread, your body may have learned that life is mostly demand. If it begins in self-criticism, your inner world may have learned that worth is unstable. If it begins in hurry, your nervous system may have learned that being alive means being behind. Can you feel how exhausting that is? Can you feel how long you may have been living inside invisible agreements that were never truly yours? Somewhere deep inside, you've always known that not every thought deserves to become your morning. Not every feeling needs to become your identity. Not every inherited emotional tone needs to become your destiny. But when life is fast, when old patterns are strong, when healing has been delayed or fragmented, it is easy to wake up inside an atmosphere that feels chosen for you. Morning listening changes that dynamic. It gives you a way to intervene before momentum fully forms. It offers a gentle but powerful pause in which your consciousness can receive something more life-giving than fear. It says, before I step into the day, let me notice what I am about to carry. Let me notice the atmosphere. Let me remember that I have more influence here than I have been taught to believe. Not control, influence. That distinction matters. Control is harsh. It demands. It fears uncertainty. It tries to dominate experience into obedience. Influence is relational. It listens. It responds. It creates conditions for something better to emerge. You are not being asked to control every morning emotion. You are being invited to influence the atmosphere in which those emotions arise. And loving words are one of the most powerful ways to do that. They do not erase reality. They alter the field in which reality is encountered. They create inner conditions in which fear no longer gets to define everything first. Maybe that is why repeated listening can feel so profound. It is not only information entering the mind. It is a different emotional climate entering the body, and climate matters. A seed planted in frozen ground cannot express what it carries in the same way as one planted in soil warmed by light. Your spirit is no different. If every day begins in inner frost, judgment, urgency, criticism, despair, then naturally certain gifts remain dormant. Joy becomes harder to access. Creativity shrinks. Trust weakens. Even simple tasks feel heavier because your whole system is expending energy adapting to the atmosphere rather than expressing what it knows. But when you begin warming the inner climate each morning with loving truth, something remarkable happens. Parts of you that have been dormant begin to respond, not instantly perhaps, but steadily. You find yourself less reactive, less brittle, more able to recover from disappointment, more able to hear your own intuition beneath the noise, more able to pause before agreeing with a painful thought. The same life may still be there, but you are no longer meeting it from winter alone. This is where the shift becomes visible. Not because you have become unrealistic, not because difficulty has vanished, but because your inner atmosphere has become more hospitable to your own life. Have you noticed how some people can move through challenge without becoming internally violent? That does not always mean they have easier lives. Often it means they have different mornings, different internal agreements, different ways of entering the day. They have learned, consciously or not, that their energy must be met before their obligations are. They have learned that the way they speak to themselves shapes the quality of everything else. They have learned that peace is not an afterthought. It is infrastructure. You can learn this too, even if your old mornings were chaotic, even if gentleness feels foreign, even if your first instinct is still to brace, even if you have spent years thinking energy work had to be dramatic to be real. The truth is, some of the deepest energetic work is repetitive, simple, and almost invisible from the outside. It is what happens when loving language meets an unguarded moment and keeps meeting it until the body stops resisting care. It is what happens when the same truth enters you day after day until it begins to sound familiar. It is what happens when you no longer let the past be the first author of the morning. And perhaps this is one of the most tender parts of the journey, realizing how much of your energy has been shaped by atmospheres you did not consciously choose. The atmosphere of your childhood, the atmosphere of your work, the atmosphere of relationships where you felt unseen, the atmosphere of cultural messages that taught you to measure your worth by output, the atmosphere of old fears that became normal because they stayed so long. None of that means you are powerless, but it does mean compassion is required. Because when people say, just think positive, they often ignore how deeply atmosphere imprints itself on the body. Healing is not the act of thinking nicer thoughts over old pain while nothing else changes. Healing is the act of steadily creating a new internal environment in which the old pain is no longer the ruling authority. Morning listening helps create that environment. It is like opening a window in a room you did not realize had grown stale. It is like bringing fresh air to beliefs that had become suffocating. It is like telling your whole being, we will no longer begin each day under the spell of old emotional weather. Maybe that is why your whole energy can shift completely. Because mornings are not isolated moments. They are tuning forks. They set resonance. They establish emotional posture. They influence how you interpret what follows. When you begin in fear, you often perceive more threat. When you begin in tenderness, you often notice more possibility. The outer world may not change immediately, but the inner lens through which you meet it absolutely can. And the lens changes everything. A delay can become proof that life is against you, or simply a pause. A mistake can become evidence that you are failing, or an ordinary part of being human. A difficult conversation can become a personal threat, or an invitation to stay present in truth. The difference is not always in the event. Often it is in the atmosphere from which you meet it. That is why your morning belongs to more than routine. It belongs to perception. It belongs to identity. It belongs to relationship. It belongs to energy. If you have been carrying an atmosphere of unworthiness for years, morning listening begins loosening its hold. If you have been carrying an atmosphere of constant pressure, morning listening begins questioning its necessity. If you have been carrying an atmosphere of emotional loneliness, morning listening begins offering companionship. And if you have been carrying an atmosphere of self-abandonment, morning listening becomes a daily act of return. You return to yourself before the world uses you. You return to truth before fear narrates the day. You return to your body before demand turns it into a tool. You return to love before history starts speaking in your name. That is sacred. And yes, it is practical too, because energy shifts are not only mystical experiences, they are lived realities. They show up in whether you can pause before reacting, in whether your chest tightens less quickly, in whether you remember to breathe when you feel overwhelmed, in whether you stop making every uncomfortable feeling mean something terrible, in whether you can move through a day without turning against yourself every time you feel tired or uncertain. These are energy shifts. Do not underestimate them because they are gentle. The world often trains people to worship dramatic change while ignoring the small, consistent movements that actually restore a life. But your healing may not look dramatic. It may look like beginning the day with one compassionate message instead of one cruel one. It may look like not reaching for your phone right away. It may look like placing a hand on your heart and listening long enough for your breathing to change. It may look like saying, I am willing to let peace be present here, even before I fully know how. That willingness is powerful. And the more often you begin there, the more often your energy remembers its way home. The words you hear in those first sacred moments do not merely comfort you. They begin rearranging what your body believes is safe. That is the part many people overlook. They think loving words are simply emotional decoration, a pleasant layer placed over an unchanged life. But your body is always interpreting. It is always asking, am I in danger? Am I alone? Am I expected to perform? Am I allowed to rest? Am I accepted? Do I belong here? And the words you receive each morning answer those questions far more deeply than you may realize. If the first message your system hears is hurry, your body prepares for demand. If the first message it hears is fear, your body prepares for defense. If the first message it hears is self-judgment, your body prepares for inadequacy. But if the first message it hears is love, if the first message says you are safe enough to breathe, worthy enough to begin gently, whole enough to trust yourself, precious enough not to be rushed into self-betrayal, then your body begins preparing for a different kind of day. Safety is not only physical, it is emotional, relational, energetic. And many people are walking through life physically alive, but emotionally unsafe. They are functioning, achieving, responding, solving, helping, but inside the body is still braced. The shoulders remain lifted, the jaw remains tight, the breath remains shallow. The system remains half convinced that something difficult is always about to happen. This is not because they are doing life wrong. It is because the body learned to survive atmospheres that required vigilance, and it never fully learned how to believe in ease. Morning listening is one way of teaching ease, not through force, through evidence, through repeated experiences of gentleness that slowly tell the body another way is possible here. Do you see how beautiful that is? You are not arguing your way into peace. You are embodying it. You are letting peace become something your nervous system can practice recognizing. Day by day, breath by breath, word by word. Perhaps you have tried to think your way into feeling better before. Perhaps you have analyzed yourself endlessly. Perhaps you have understood your patterns intellectually and still felt no real shift in your energy. That happens because insight alone is not always enough. The body needs experience. The heart needs repetition. The inner child, the frightened self, the overburdened self, those parts need more than explanation. They need to be met. They need to hear something different at the level where fear first formed. That is why repetition matters so much. The body trusts patterns. It learns through what returns. It relaxes not because it was told once that everything is fine, but because it is shown again and again that kindness is here, that care is here, that a gentler rhythm is here. There is a phrase I want you to hold close. Your body is listening. Even when your mind is distracted, even when you are skeptical, even when you do not know whether the practice is working, your body is listening. It is registering tone, pace, atmosphere, intention, presence. It is noticing whether your mornings are still places of pressure or whether they are becoming places of refuge. Your body is listening. The way you speak to yourself while brushing your teeth, the way you think about the day ahead, the way you react to feeling tired, the way you interpret that first wave of discomfort, the way you allow loving words to enter or deflect them before they land. Your body is listening, and over time, it believes what is repeated enough. That is not a threat. It is a promise. Because if the body can learn fear, it can learn peace. If it can learn bracing, it can learn softening. If it can learn to expect criticism, it can learn to expect care. If it can learn that mourning means pressure, it can learn that mourning means return. This is one of the hidden gifts of spiritual practice done with tenderness. It does not bypass the body. It includes it. It invites the body into the healing instead of asking it to behave as though nothing ever happened. It says, I know you have reasons for your tension. I know you have carried things in silence. I know you have learned to protect us, and now I want to introduce you to another experience. I want to let you hear love while the day is still quiet. I want to show you over time that we are not living in the same atmosphere anymore. That kind of love is intelligent. It does not shame your defenses. It gently updates them. Maybe that is why some mornings you feel emotional when you hear a simple affirmation. Not because you are fragile, but because some part of you recognizes nourishment after a long season of scarcity. Some part of you hears, perhaps for the first time in a way it can receive, that your existence does not need to be justified by effort. Some part of you hears that your worth did not begin when you became useful. Some part of you hears that rest is not a moral failure. Some part of you hears that your feelings are not inconveniences to overcome before you become lovable again. And the tears come, let them. They are not interruptions. They are evidence of contact. Evidence that the words are reaching places productivity never could. Your body is listening, and it is making new associations. Mourning can mean gentleness. Stillness can mean safety. Love can be spoken aloud. Care can come before performance. Worth can be felt before achievement. These are revolutionary associations for many people. They change the quality of everything, because once the body begins to feel safer, the mind does not have to work so hard to maintain control. Once the nervous system softens, intuition becomes easier to hear. Once your inner atmosphere is not ruled by constant emergency, creativity can return. Pleasure can return. Patience can return. Even your physical energy may begin to change, because so much of exhaustion comes from the cost of constant internal guarding. Have you noticed how tiring it is to be emotionally defended all the time? To expect disappointment, to scan for conflict, to monitor everything, to meet each morning as though life is already asking too much from you? That kind of vigilance consumes enormous energy, and often, because it has become normal, you no longer realize how much it costs. Morning listening helps reveal that cost without condemning you for paying it. It simply offers another possibility, a new arrangement, a new nervous system conversation. What if today began with the message, you do not have to protect yourself from your own life in the same way anymore? What if today began with, breathe first, decide later? What if today began with, the world does not get to speak before love does? What if today began with, your worth is already established? Can you feel the difference in your body, even hearing that? The slight softening, the little pause, the possibility that perhaps something in you has been waiting a very long time for words like these. This is why the morning can become sacred medicine. Not because the hour itself is magical, but because you are more impressionable then, more open, less armored, more available for a repatterning that becomes harder once the day has fully accelerated. The mind may not want to believe in something so simple, but the body often knows the truth before the mind catches up. Your shoulders know, your big, shy wreath knows, your chest knows. The part of you that clenches before stress has even arrived. That part knows whether it is being met by pressure or peace. And when peace meets it often enough, it begins to respond. That response may be subtle at first, a slightly deeper inhale, a little more patience with yourself, a little less dread on Sunday night, a little more ability to sit before grabbing for distraction, a little more capacity to choose your reaction instead of being pulled by it. These are body level shifts, safety level shifts, energy level shifts. Do not dismiss them because they are quiet. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet often means deep. There is a way that loving repetition enters a person like water entering dry earth. It does not shout. It soaks. It reaches places conversation cannot. It alters texture. It changes what can be received. And after enough mornings of that kind of contact, the inner ground begins to hold more life, more resilience, more softness, more trust. This is not because you forced yourself to heal. It is because you allowed yourself to be gently spoken back into relationship with your own being. Your body is listening, and what it hears every morning is becoming your future. Have you noticed how different your whole day feels when you are not trying to conquer yourself before breakfast? There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from beginning each day as your own opponent. Before the sun is fully up, the mind has already created a battlefield. You should be more disciplined. You should be less emotional. You should have figured this out by now. You should not still feel this way. You should wake up stronger, calmer, clearer, more focused, more inspired. And hidden beneath all of that is a painful assumption that who you are in this moment is somehow inadequate to begin. That assumption steals so much energy. Not because you are weak, but because war is expensive. Inner war drains clarity. It drains joy. It drains presence. It drains the very energy you are trying to cultivate. And then people mistakenly conclude that they need more force, more pressure, more harshness to finally become the person who can handle life. But what if the opposite is true? What if much of your low energy has not come from insufficient discipline, but from excessive self-opposition? What if you are tired because you have been trying to conquer a self that really needed compassion? That question changes everything. Because when you stop treating yourself like the obstacle, your energy has somewhere else to go. It can move toward creation, toward service, toward rest, toward delight, toward steady action without internal violence. It no longer gets consumed by the cost of self-surveillance and self-correction before the day has even begun. That is one of the quiet miracles of morning listening. It interrupts the instinct to attack yourself into readiness. It offers another path into the day, one rooted in alignment rather than conquest. You do not need to conquer yourself. You need to come home to yourself. Those are not the same thing. Conquest is built on mistrust. It says the self cannot be allowed to exist without force. Homecoming is built on relationship. It says the self can be guided, comforted, and aligned through truth and care. Which one creates more sustainable energy? Your heart already knows. There is a reason people often feel deeply relieved when they finally hear language that does not demand, perform, or pressure. The relief is not laziness, it is recognition. Recognition that the soul has never wanted domination in order to grow. It has wanted light, water, time, presence, loving repetition. The same things all living things require to unfold well. Imagine a garden being shouted into bloom. Imagine dawn being ordered to arrive faster. Imagine a river being criticized for not rushing in a straighter line. Nature does not grow that way, and neither do you. You may have learned harshness because it seemed effective. Perhaps it got results. Perhaps it kept you functioning. Perhaps it earned approval. But what earns approval and what nourishes the soul are not always the same thing. You may have become very skilled at moving through life with pressure as your fuel. That does not mean pressure is the best fuel available to you. It may simply be the one your system learned to trust because love felt less reliable. Morning listening begins teaching a new fuel source. Not panic, but peace. Not shame, but self-respect. Not urgency, but steadiness. Not self-criticism, but self-remembering. That kind of shift can transform everything. Because when your day begins from a steadier center, you do not spend so much energy recovering from yourself. You do not need as much damage control after every mistake, delay, emotion, or imperfect moment. You stop taking each human experience as proof that you are failing. You stop burning through your vitality by making everything mean something terrible. You become more available for life because you are less entangled in resisting your own humanity. This is what many people misunderstand about peace. They think peace is passive. They think it means becoming less engaged, less productive, less effective. But true peace is powerful. It is an organizing force. It allows energy to flow without so much internal friction. It lets you act from clarity instead of compulsion. It gives your thoughts less power to hijack the body. It makes action cleaner because it is not constantly contaminated by self-attack. Have you ever finished a task and still felt depleted because of how you treated yourself while doing it? That matters. It means the task itself was not the only thing costing energy. The inner tone mattered too. In the same way, when you begin the morning in love instead of pressure, even ordinary responsibilities can feel different because the energy performing them is different. The day may ask the same things, but you are no longer offering yourself to those things from the same depleted state. What changes when you are not trying to conquer yourself before breakfast? Your breathing changes. Your posture changes. Your relationship to time changes. Your tolerance for uncertainty changes. Your ability to recover changes. Your capacity for kindness changes, and perhaps most beautifully, your sense of identity changes. Because conquest creates a self who always feels one mistake away from inadequacy, but compassion creates a self who knows worth remains intact even while growth continues. That is freedom, and it does not make you passive. It makes you less divided. A divided self spends enormous energy pulling in opposite directions. One part striving, another part exhausted. One part demanding, another part hurting. One part performing, another part longing to be seen. Morning listening does not instantly dissolve all inner division, but it begins creating a meeting place. A place where the demanding self can soften. A place where the hurting self can be acknowledged. A place where the deeper truth can speak louder than whichever part is shouting the most. This is one reason repeated gentle words are so transformative. They help the self stop fragmenting under pressure. They gather you. They remind your scattered energy where to belong. They say, come back. Come back from overthinking. Come back from self-judgment. Come back from old fear. Come back from rehearsing pain before anything has happened. Come back into the body. Come back into the breath. Come back into this moment where love is available right now. That gathering changes the day. Maybe not all at once, but truly. You may find that you no longer need as much external validation to stay steady. You may find that setbacks no longer throw you as far. You may find that you become less reactive to other people's moods because your own atmosphere has more integrity. You may find that your mornings stop feeling like a race to become acceptable and start feeling like a relationship with what is sacred in you. That is not small. That is a profound, energetic reorganization. And if you have spent most of your life thinking that growth had to hurt to count, I want you to hear this very clearly. Ease is not the enemy of transformation. Ease is often the environment transformation needs in order to become sustainable. Your sensitivity is a gift, and that sensitivity blooms differently in an atmosphere of gentleness than it ever could in one of constant self-correction. The sensitivity you have been trying to manage, to tone down, to hide from the world, it is your gift. And one reason it has felt overwhelming at times is not because the gift is wrong, but because the conditions around it have not always been kind. Morning listening begins creating kinder conditions. It gives the gift a place to breathe. It gives your emotional intelligence, your intuition, your depth, your tenderness, a home where they are not immediately put on trial. What if your energy is not asking to be pushed harder, but held more wisely? What if the shift comes not when you finally become better, but when you stop starting the day as your own project to fix? What if love is not a reward for growth, but the ground from which growth becomes possible? These are not sentimental questions. They are structural ones, because the answers determine how you live. If you believe pressure creates worth, you will keep exhausting yourself. If you believe compassion strengthens truth, you will begin building a life with more coherence. Morning listening is one of the simplest ways to embody that second belief, to practice it, to make it real, to let the body experience it before the mind fully understands. And in that experience, your whole day begins to open. There is a quiet kind of listening that does not fill you with noise, but returns you to the part of yourself that never stopped knowing how to heal. This part of you does not shout. It does not perform. It does not demand attention through drama. It waits faithfully. Beneath the rush, beneath the old habits, beneath the layers of self-protection and adaptation. It waits like a still pool beneath a storm, unchanged in essence, even when the surface has been turbulent for years. You have touched this part of yourself before. Maybe in rare moments of silence. Maybe while watching morning light move across a room. Maybe in the presence of music that felt like prayer. Maybe in the split second after a deep sigh, when something inside you said, "There you are." That part has not left. It is not lost. It is not damaged beyond reach. It is simply harder to hear when life is loud and the nervous system is always anticipating the next demand. Morning listening creates conditions in which this deeper part can become audible again. Not through force, but through lowering the volume of everything that is not essential. In those moments, loving words do more than soothe you. They align you with what has been true beneath all the turbulence. They bring you back into contact with the self that knows how to trust, how to soften, how to repair, how to begin again without making each beginning into proof that you failed before. This is one of the great misunderstandings around healing, that it is something you manufacture through effort alone. But much of healing is remembering. Remembering what your body feels like when it is not clenched around danger. Remembering what your spirit feels like when it is not performing for approval. Remembering what your inner world feels like when fear is not the first language spoken there. Morning listening helps with this remembering. It gently removes the static so the signal beneath can come through. There is a version of you that knows how to heal, not because it has all the answers, not because it never struggles, but because life itself is wired toward restoration when given supportive conditions. A wound tends toward closing. A body tends toward balance. A heart tends toward connection. A soul tends toward truth. These movements can be interrupted, delayed, complicated, and obscured, but the intelligence beneath them remains. Morning listening is one way of cooperating with that intelligence instead of constantly overriding it. What if healing is less about becoming someone new and more about creating enough quiet to hear who you have been beneath the noise? What if the reason you are drawn to tea, these morning moments, is because something deep in you recognizes them as a place of reunion? What if the energy shift comes not from adding more content to your mind, but from creating more contact with what already carries wisdom in you? Your heart already knows this. Some truths do not need to be argued into existence. They need to be heard often enough that the body stops doubting them. I am willing to live with more ease. I am safe to be gentle with myself. I release the need to begin in pressure. I choose thoughts that nourish me. I deserve peace. These are not magic phrases because of the words alone. They become powerful because they help clear the way back to something your deeper self recognizes. Something in you recognizes love when it arrives consistently. Something in you recognizes truth when it is spoken without force. Something in you recognizes what belongs to your healing and what belongs to old fear. That recognition is not always dramatic. It often feels like a softening, a slowing, a subtle inner yes, a slight release in the chest, a feeling that the room inside you has become less crowded. That is not imagination. That is alignment. And alignment changes energy, because so much depletion comes from misalignment, from saying yes when the body means no, from carrying identities that no longer fit, from thinking thoughts that violate your deeper knowing, from moving through life in rhythms that leave no room for what is sacred. Morning listening begins correcting that gently. It says, "Before the day scatters me, I will gather myself. Before old roles take over, I will hear words that remind me who I am beneath performance. Before the world pulls at me, I will return to what feels true." That return is not always comfortable at first. Sometimes the deeper self has been ignored for so long that coming back to it stirs grief. You may realize how long you have lived disconnected from your own tenderness. You may feel the ache of all the mornings spent rushing past what needed presence. You may feel sadness for the years you measured yourself by output while your soul quietly waited for acknowledgement. Let that grief be part of the healing. It is not failure. It is contact. Contact with truth often feels emotional because the self knows when it is finally being met. There was a woman I once heard about who spent years beginning every day with dread. Nothing in her outer life looked terrible to others. She was capable, responsible, admired for how much she managed. But inside, every morning felt like a cliff. She woke with tightness in her chest, already rehearsing everything that could go wrong. She thought she needed a better schedule, more discipline, more solutions. But what changed her was not another strategy. It was one simple choice. For a few minutes each morning, before touching anything else, she sat quietly and listened to words of peace. At first, it felt almost useless. Then, weeks later, she realized something had changed. The cliff was gone. Life still had demands, but she was no longer stepping into it alone. She had created a bridge back to herself. You are being invited to build that same bridge now. And perhaps this is what the deepest listening really is. Not hearing something from outside yourself, but allowing loving language to escort you back to what has always been sacred within you. The voice may come through a recording, a prayer, a spoken affirmation, a gentle practice. But the destination is inward. It is always inward, toward the part of you that can witness, choose, soften, and heal. You may have been taught to distrust that inward place, to value action more than awareness, to value productivity more than presence, to value speed more than depth. But your healing will not come from abandoning your inner life more skillfully. It will come from learning how to inhabit it with more love. Morning listening teaches that inhabiting. It teaches you to stay long enough to feel, long enough to notice, long enough to hear something truer than the old reflex, long enough to remember that your inner world is not a problem to escape from, but a landscape to bless. Like dawn touching a dark room without argument, repeated loving words begin changing the inner climate you once thought was permanent. This is the beauty of gentle repetition. It does not need to overpower what has been. It simply returns faithfully until what once felt permanent begins to loosen. Fear may have been loud. Self-judgment may have been long-standing. Exhaustion may have felt woven into your identity. But permanence is often just pain that has been repeated enough to feel inevitable. Loving repetition reveals that inevitability was never the whole truth. A dark room can feel absolute while you are inside it. The mind adjusts. The eyes adjust. The body starts moving as though darkness is simply the condition of life. And then light enters, not violently, not all at once, but steadily. A curtain opens. Dawn arrives. And suddenly you see that the darkness was never the room's identity. It was a condition, temporary, even if prolonged. Your inner life is like that. Many of the states you thought were simply who you are may actually be conditions created by repeated atmospheres, repeated messages, repeated stress, repeated absence of care. That means they can change, not because you deny them, because you introduce another condition often enough that it becomes real. This is one of the hidden powers of daily practice. It does not ask transformation to happen in one perfect moment. It allows transformation to accumulate. Word by word, morning by morning, return by return. And that accumulation matters because your deepest patterns were not formed instantly either. They were built through exposure, through repetition, through what was spoken around you, implied to you, demanded from you, withheld from you. Why would healing not also honor the power of repetition? It does. It says, "Let me speak kindness where criticism used to live. Let me speak worth where inadequacy used to rule. Let me speak spaciousness where pressure used to crowd everything. Let me speak trust where fear used to narrate every unknown. And then let me keep eking until the new climate becomes familiar." This is how inner climates change. Not through occasional inspiration, but through consistent reorientation. A single loving morning can be beautiful, but many loving mornings begin to change what the body expects. They alter anticipation. They soften reflexes. They create emotional memory. They teach the system that peace is not an accident. It is something you are allowed to practice receiving. Your body begins to wake differently when it knows it will be met. That sentence matters. Read it again inside yourself. Your body begins to wake differently when it knows it will be met. When it knows the first words will not be demands. when it knows the first tone will not be criticism, when it knows there will be a place to land before the day begins asking for performance. That expectation changes things. It changes how quickly the mind spirals. It changes how tightly the chest closes. It changes how much energy is spent bracing. It changes the whole emotional geometry of the morning. And from there, the day unfolds differently, not always dramatically, but often unmistakably. You may notice that you no longer snap at yourself the moment you feel behind. You may notice more grace around imperfection. You may notice that your intuition surfaces more naturally, because panic is no longer filling every available space. You may notice that your relationships feel different, because you are not entering them already depleted by your own inner climate. You may notice more gratitude, not as a forced exercise, but as something that arises because the inner room has more light in it. That is how climate change looks on the inside. Subtle, then cumulative, quiet, then undeniable. A little more openness today, a little more trust next week, a little less dread next month, a little more self-respect in the way you handle your emotions, a little more tenderness in the way you recover from pain. And then one day, you realize that what once felt permanent has been shifting for some time. This is important to hear. Healing often becomes obvious only after it has already been happening quietly. That is why patience is sacred. Because if you keep demanding dramatic evidence, you may overlook the holy subtleties that are already transforming your life. The pause before self-criticism, the willingness to breathe, the softer start, the changed tone, the lessened urgency. These are signs of dawn. Do not dismiss them because the sun is still rising. There are many people who abandon practices too early because they mistake gentleness for ineffectiveness. They have been trained to equate intensity with progress. If something is not loud, hard, or immediate, they assume it is not powerful. But life itself teaches another way. Seeds do not break open with applause. Snow melts without an announcement. The tide reshapes the shore through repetition, not spectacle. Some of the deepest shifts happen through faithful contact with what nourishes. Your energy is no different. You do not need a dramatic spiritual performance every morning. You need of light to keep changing the room. Enough truth to keep interrupting the lie. Enough compassion to keep softening the old reflex. Enough repetition that your body starts calling love familiar. Perhaps the phrase, "your energy will shift completely," feels almost too large. And yet, what does completely really mean? It does not mean you become a different species of human. It does not mean you never feel sadness, frustration, or uncertainty again. It means the center from which you live begins to change. The baseline changes. The default atmosphere changes. The relationship changes. The meaning you make of life changes. The way you interpret your own feelings changes. The way you begin changes. And from that, everything else is affected. Complete shift often begins with subtle beginnings. The first time you choose peace before your phone, the first time you let kind words enter before the critic does, the first time you notice you are rushing and decide not to continue the violence, the first time you hear an affirmation and instead of dismissing it, you let it stay. These are not trivial moments. They are moments of inner policy change. Moments when a new governance begins. Moments when fear loses its automatic right to lead. Moments when your own consciousness becomes a more intentional home. And this matters not only for you, it matters for everyone who meets you. Because inner climate is contagious, not in a manipulative way, but in a relational way. The peace you practice in private alters how you move through the world. It changes the temperature of your responses. It changes how much chaos you absorb. It changes whether your loved ones meet a version of you who has already abandoned herself or a version who has already returned. That is profound. That is service. That is love in action. And still, the first beneficiary is you. You deserve to live in an inner room that has windows. You deserve to wake in an atmosphere that does not always smell like old fear. You deserve to discover that what felt permanent was not your essence, only your conditioning. You deserve dawn. And dawn, beloved, is not in a hurry. It arrives faithfully, quietly, without argument. It does not debate with darkness. It simply returns until darkness is no longer the ruler of the room. Let your morning listening be like that. Do not argue with every old fear. Do not negotiate endlessly with every painful thought. Let the light return. Let the words return. Let the truth return. Let the atmosphere change, because you keep opening the curtains of your own consciousness. One morning, you will realize that you no longer wake up in the same way. Not because life became perfect, but because the room inside you did, or rather, because it became more honest, more spacious, more lit by what has always belonged there. That is the gift of repetition. That is the gift of morning listening. That is the quiet miracle of letting love arrive before the rest of the day has a chance to tell you who to be. And when this becomes your morning rhythm, the people around you may sense he shift before you even have language for it. They may notice that you are less reactive, less hurried, less available for unnecessary conflict. They may notice that your presence feels steadier, that your words land differently, that you do not get pulled into the same patterns as quickly. They may not know why. They may not see the private moments by the window, the hand on the heart, the listening before dawn, the gentle return to truth before the house wakes or the messages begin. But they will feel the effect. Because the way you begin with yourself becomes the way you arrive to others. If you begin the day in criticism, you often bring that sharpness into conversation, even if only subtly. If you begin the day in fear, you may interpret neutrality as threat and simple misunderstandings as something larger. If you begin the day already overwhelmed, everything asked of you can feel like too much. But if you begin the day in a field of compassion, a different self walks into the room. A self who has been met. A self who does not need to take every discomfort personally. A self who remembers how to breathe before responding. That changes relationships. It changes parenting. It changes partnership. It changes the way you answer emails, set boundaries, listen to pain, move through conflict, and return after being triggered. This is why private healing is never only private. It becomes relational. The peace you practice in the early hours leaves fingerprints on everything you touch, and perhaps that has been part of your longing all along. Not simply to feel better in isolation, but to live in such a way that your inner steadiness blesses the spaces you move through. To stop spilling old pressure into every conversation. To stop carrying the emotional leftovers of your own unkind mornings into the lives of people you love. To become someone whose presence feels like exhale, not because you are perfect, but because you are no longer beginning the day in war. Have you noticed how often what hurts us gets passed along not through intention, but through atmosphere? A rushed parent creates a rushed room. A self-critical person often radiates tension without meaning to. Someone who wakes in fear may bring a defensive edge into spaces that needed softness. Most people do not wake up wanting to transfer stress to the people around them. It simply happens when there has been no pause, no return, no conscious choosing of what kind of energy gets to lead. Morning listening helps interrupt that unconscious transfer. It creates a sacred buffer between what you woke up carrying and what you are about to bring into the world. That buffer is mercy. Mercy for you, because you deserve a chance to gather yourself before life rushes in. Mercy for others, because they deserve to meet you not only in your reactivity, but in your truest presence. And mercy for the larger field of life, because every person who learns how to begin in peace becomes a small source of peace in a world that desperately needs it. This is not about becoming emotionally flat or endlessly serene. It is not about never having bad days. It is about being less governed by old momentum. When the day begins in truth, there is more room for conscious choice later. More room to say, I do not need to answer from my first wound. More room to say, I can pause. More room to say, I hear the old fear, but it is not the only voice here now. That kind of room is everything, and people will feel it, sometimes before you do. They may say you seem calmer. They may say you feel different lately. They may trust your presence more because you are no longer leaking so much unprocessed urgency. They may feel safer opening up because you are less defended. They may even be confused by the change because humans often expect consistency from the versions of us they have known. If you have been the one who always rushed, always anticipated disaster, always overgave, always reacted quickly, always carried tension like it was part of your identity, then a gentler you may surprise people. Let it. Their adjustment is not evidence that your shift is wrong. It may simply mean your nervous system is no longer matching patterns that were never sustainable. This is one of the subtle challenges of real transformation. As your inner atmosphere changes, your outer relationships may need time to reorganize around it. Some will welcome it, some will not understand it. Some may unconsciously miss the version of you that was easier to pull into drama, urgency, or self-sacrifice. That does not mean you are going backward. It may mean you are becoming less available for old emotional economies. Morning listening strengthens you for that. Because each day you are reminded before anyone else speaks that you are allowed to live differently now, allowed to pause, allowed to choose peace over panic, allowed to honor your body, allowed to stop making yourself responsible for every atmosphere in the room, allowed to stop confusing self-erasure with love, allowed to become more present without becoming more porous to what drains you. What a gift to bring that into your relationships. What a gift to begin from a place that says, I am already rooted before I arrive. The people around you may not know that this rootedness was built in quiet morning moments. They may only know that something in your energy no longer hooks so easily, that you can stay soft without collapsing, that you can say no without hardening, that you can care deeply without drowning in everyone else's emotions, that you can remain kind without betraying yourself. These are fruits of an inner climate that has changed, fruits of listening, fruits of repetition, fruits of not abandoning yourself at the doorway of each day. And let us be honest, sometimes the people who benefit most from your transformation are the ones who are closest to your most unguarded self. The child who sees how you handle frustration before the coffee is made. The partner who feels whether your body is braced when the day begins. The friend who notices whether you now have more spaciousness in your listening. The coworker who senses that your steadiness does not disappear every time something shifts unexpectedly. These are sacred impacts, quiet but sacred. You do not need to announce the change. You do not need to explain the method. You do not need to convince anyone that listening each morning is powerful. Your life will say it. Your tone will say it. Your presence will say it. Your reactions will say it. Your boundaries will say it. Your peace will say it. And perhaps in time, someone will ask you what changed, and maybe your answer will be simple. I stopped letting fear be the first voice I heard every day. I started listening to what love had to say before the world began pulling at me. I gave my mornings back to my soul, and slowly everything else began to follow. That is how real transformation often looks, not loud, not performative, not branded for the world to admire. Quiet, rooted, lived, embodied, a private devotion that becomes public fruit. This matters especially if you have spent years trying to help, support, or care for others. Because caregivers, nurturers, empaths, and deeply responsible people often underestimate how much their own inner depletion shapes what they bring into relationships. They may continue giving even when their well is dry. They may continue listening even when they themselves feel unheard. They may continue holding everyone else's emotions while waking up each morning with no one holding theirs. Morning listening is a way of becoming one of the people who holds you. That matters more than you know. Because when you are held inwardly, you stop demanding that every external interaction compensate for what is missing. You can love more freely because you are not constantly starving. You can listen without disappearing. You can care without collapsing. You can be present without secretly resenting the cost. The people around you may feel only that you are more balanced, more available, more at peace. But beneath that is a profound shift. You have stopped asking the world to do first what your own mornings can begin doing for you. And that is not isolation. It is self-partnership, a mature, loving, deeply spiritual form of self-partnership. What a beautiful thing to cultivate. One morning you will realize that the peace you kept waiting to find has been growing inside you day by day while you were learning how to listen. It may not announce itself dramatically. There may be no trumpet of certainty, no perfect moment where all struggle disappears and life suddenly becomes uncomplicated. Instead, you may notice something quieter. You wake and realize the old dread is no longer the first thing in the room. Or you move through a difficult morning and discover you did not abandon yourself inside it. Or you face disappointment and somehow compassion arrives before shame does. And in that moment you understand the peace was not missing. It was being grown. That is how peace often enters a human life. Not found once, grown daily, watered by attention, strengthened by repetition, protected by practice. The tragedy is that many people give up because they are waiting to find peace somewhere outside themselves while overlooking all the ways peace wants to be cultivated within. They look for a life with no uncertainty, no discomfort, no demand, no emotional complexity. But that is not what peace requires. Peace requires relationship. Relationship with your thoughts. Relationship with your body. Relationship with your mornings. Relationship with the voice that gets to narrate your day. Morning listening is one of the most powerful ways to build that relationship because it begins before the world has fully entered. It begins in the place where your consciousness is still impressionable and your soul is still close to the surface. And maybe that has always been the invitation. Not to escape life, but to begin it differently. To stop searching for peace as though it were a destination hidden somewhere in the future. To stop imagining that peace belongs only to people with simpler stories or easier lives. To stop postponing gentleness until you have finally earned it. Peace is not waiting at the end of your self-improvement. It is asking to be practiced in the way you meet yourself now. Your heart already knows this. It knows that the life you long for cannot be built on daily self-abandonment. It knows that energy changes when language changes. It knows that love repeated becomes belief. It knows that mornings are not empty, they are formative. It knows that listening is not passive, it is creative. Because every morning you are creating a version of the day. You are not creating every event. You are not controlling every outcome, but you are shaping the field from which you will meet what comes. That field matters. And you are more worthy of tending it than you may have realized. Imagine what becomes possible when your mornings are no longer negotiations with fear, but devotions to truth. Imagine the cumulative effect of waking each day and hearing before anything else that you are worthy, safe, capable of love, allowed to rest, permitted to be human, and still profoundly connected to life. Imagine what happens to a body that receives that message not once, but hundreds of times. Imagine what happens to a heart that no longer starts each day proving itself. Imagine what happens to a soul that is no longer treated like an afterthought. This is how the inner garden grows, quietly, faithfully, not all at once, but enough. Enough light each morning, enough water in the form of kindness, enough soil in the form of stillness, enough patience to let the roots do their hidden work, and then, one day, fruit appears where you once saw only effort. Patience, clarity, resilience, self-respect, a steadier breath, a warmer presence, a life less ruled by panic, a day less likely to be derailed by the first difficult feeling. These are fruits of peace grown slowly. Do not underestimate slow growth. The deepest roots often form where no one sees them. What you are doing each morning when you listen is rooting in what is true, rooting in what is kind, rooting in a relationship with yourself that can hold more life. And rooted people move differently. They are not immune to storms, but they are less likely to be uprooted by every wind. They can bend without breaking. They can feel without drowning. They can change without collapsing. That is the kind of strength morning listening grows, a soft strength, a deep strength, a strength that does not need hardness to prove itself. And perhaps, as you continue this practice, you will begin to notice something else. You are no longer seeking peace with the same desperation, not because you do not care, but because you are beginning to trust the process by which it grows. You know now that one morning matters, and another matters, and another. You understand that peace is not an accidental mood that randomly visits. It is an atmosphere you are learning to cultivate, a field you are learning to enter, a language you are learning to speak more fluently inside your own life. That trust changes everything. Because desperation tends to create grasping. Grasping demands immediate results. Immediate results are rarely how soul work unfolds, but trust allows you to keep showing up, to keep listening even when the outer life is still messy, to keep letting truth in even when old thoughts still echo, to keep watering what you cannot yet fully see. Trust says something real is happening here, even if it is still beneath the surface. And something real is happening. Each time you choose loving words before anxious habits, something real happens. Each time you let your body soften while listening, something real happens. Each time you notice an old reflex and do not let it decide the whole day, something real happens. Each time you return after forgetting, after rushing, after drifting, after reacting, something real happens. You are building peace, not performing it. Building it, breath by breath, morning by morning, choice by choice. And once you understand that, you stop treating yourself like a failed project every time the process is imperfect. You understand that gardens are not judged for not blooming in every season. You understand that even cloudy mornings still participate in dawn. You understand that missing one day does not erase the roots. You understand that what matters most is not perfection, but return. Return is what teaches the body trust. Return is what tells the soul, I have not forgotten you. Return is what transforms listening from a technique into a relationship. What a sacred thing to know that the peace you wanted was not absent. It was waiting for rhythm, waiting for space, waiting for a consistent place to land, waiting for you to believe that the first moments of your day are holy enough to deserve protection, waiting for you to stop dismissing gentleness as too small to matter, waiting for you to discover that some of the biggest shifts in life begin with what you choose to hear before your feet touch the floor. So if you are standing at the beginning of this practice, let this be enough for now. You do not have to understand everything. You do not have to fix your whole life. You do not have to become a master of morning peace overnight. Simply begin. Begin by listening. Begin by allowing. Begin by opening the room inside you to a little more light than it had yesterday. Begin by trusting that repetition is not boring when it is creating a new atmosphere. Begin by remembering that your sensitivity is a gift, and gifts need kind environments in order to flourish. The gift of your sensitivity, the very thing you thought made you weak, is precisely how you will transform everything you touch. Because sensitivity is not fragility when it is held well. It is perception. It is depth. It is attunement. It is the ability to feel what is true. Morning listening helps hold that gift well. It keeps sensitivity from becoming overwhelmed by pairing it with safety. It keeps depth from becoming heaviness by pairing it with compassion. It keeps openness from becoming depletion by pairing it with rootedness. That is alchemy, quiet alchemy, sacred daily alchemy. And as that alchemy unfolds, you become someone who no longer waits for peace as though it were outside your reach. You become someone who knows how to welcome it, someone who knows how to set the table for it, someone who understands that energy shifts not only when life changes around you, but when you change what you repeatedly offer your consciousness. Someone who has learned that mornings are not neutral. They are the first conversation of the day, and love deserves to speak first. So tomorrow morning, and the one after that, and the one after that, before the world begins naming you, before fear rehearses its old script, before pressure takes its familiar seat at the table, pause. Listen. Let yourself be met. Let yourself receive the words your body has needed for years. Let yourself discover that what you call energy is deeply influenced by what kind of relationship you create with yourself in those first sacred moments. And then watch. Watch how the breath changes. Watch how the chest softens. Watch how less energy is lost to inner war. Watch how the day feels different when you are not trying to conquer yourself before it begins. Watch how the old room begins to fill with light. Watch how peace, almost shyly at first, begins to trust that it is welcome here. Because one morning, perhaps sooner than you think, you will realize that your life has not only become different, it has become kinder. Kinder in the way it sounds from the inside. Kinder in the way your body wakes. Kinder in the way you speak to your mistakes. Kinder in the way you move through uncertainty. Kinder in the way your presence touches others. And in that kindness, your energy will have shifted completely. Not because you forced it, because you listened.